Good afternoon. I'm Valerie Bendt. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, my husband Bruce and I have been homeschooling our 6 children for the past 30 years. And I'm now helping my daughter to homeschool 2 of her children. And I have 4 grandchildren. So I think we'll be doing this homeschooling forever. And over the years, I used a number of different curricula to teach my children to read, and found that nothing quite suited them. And having 6 children plus tutoring numerous other children, I found that each one learned in a little bit different way. So I tried to integrate into the curriculum that I developed when my last child was learning to read. He's now 15. I tried to integrate all these different approaches for different types of learners into my program. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Reading Made Easy is a guide that I have written, but you can use a lot of the, even if you're not interested in buying my materials, a lot of the ideas that I discuss you can use and put into practice right away. This is a guide, and the parent and teacher work together from the book. We also have workbooks, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's the most important thing that you can do, though, to help your child learn to read is to help them cultivate a love for reading. That's far more important than actually teaching them to read, because we want our children to become lifelong learners. And in order to be lifelong learners, they must be lifelong readers. This will help them with all of their educational endeavors. And reading aloud is so important to your kids. I just can't tell you what a blessing that's been to me and my family over the years. A child who merely learns to read but doesn't love to read will be disadvantaged academically. And the best way to develop a love for reading in your kids is to read aloud to them on a daily basis. Even days when you don't have time to do schoolwork, if you read aloud to your kids, they will be having, that will be so advantageous to their education, far more so than doing workbooks or textbooks. But continue to read to your children even when they learn to read. Some children will be apprehensive to learn to read because they fear that their parents will stop reading aloud to them once they learn to read. So I even read aloud to my teenagers. I remember one day my sons Robert and Raymond, who are now, let's see, how old are they? 25 and 27 almost. They'll be at the end of summer. Robert and Raymond were in their teens, and I was reading aloud to them Ben-Hur, A Tale of Christ. And so I said, Robert and Raymond, come on, we're going to read now from Ben-Hur. Well, the phone rang. Raymond was on the phone, and I hear him talking to his friend Jake. He goes, well, Jake, I got to go because my mom's going to read to us now. And I can, Raymond's pausing, and he has this frown on his face. And I'm sure Jacob's saying, your mother's going to what? He goes, well, doesn't, and so my son Raymond responds to him. He goes, doesn't your mom read to you? And obviously he said, no, my mom hadn't read to me since I was 4 or whatever, And he was homeschooled, actually. And he says, well, my mom still reads to me. He said, and we're reading Ben-Hur, A Tale of Christ, and it's awesome. He says, so I got to go. So to my son, he was a teenager at the time. It was awkward that his friend's mother did not read to him still as a teenager. He thought that was strange, instead of us being strange, which was nice. But reading aloud is the simplest, least expensive, most enjoyable, and most profitable reading readiness program or activity that you can engage in. So I really want to encourage you, read aloud daily with your kids. And children love it. Why do they love it? Because they have our undivided attention, right? They can sit on our lap or sit beside us on the sofa as we read aloud. And it also builds special memories, just like these memories I have of reading aloud with my kids, and they still remember it. When my sons Robert and Raymond were teens also, we were doing a unit study on flight, and we were reading a autobiography of Eddie Rickenbacker, and it talks about how he was in the Air Force, and it talks about him being lost at sea with 7 other men in lifeboats for 3 days, okay? And this was just incredible, this account of how he saved his men. Well, my kids made me read for 2 hours straight, And my sons now, who one is in the Marine Corps and the other one is now going in the Navy, both in the officers, they still come back to me and say, remember when we read about Eddie Rickenbacker? And he was in the Air Force and how they crash landed in the Pacific, and he's going on and on. So you never know what reading aloud is going to do, the impact it will have on your kids in the future. It creates special memories. And books, especially picture books. Now, picture books are very unique. I'm not talking about easy reader books that are like, readers for children that are phonetically controlled. I'm talking about true picture books. They have an elevated language style, usually almost poetic. And it enhances a child's language development as they listen and hear you read these words. Often those picture books will use words that are not in a child's spoken vocabulary. And that's an opportunity for them to learn new words. So their vocabulary, composition skills, sequencing abilities are strengthened as they listen to well-written literature. And their world is broadened as they are introduced to new people, cultures, economic climates, political climates, and so forth through literature. And remember, as you teach your children to read, and as you read aloud from well-written books each day, that we don't lose sight of our goal, and that's to teach our children to read and to learn to love to read. And in Reading Made Easy, at the end of every lesson, there's 108 lessons in my program, I say, and it's scripted, which means that I tell you parents what to say. So the very last thing you say to the child is, now let's read a book together. And I had one mom, that's at the end of every single lesson. And I had one mom, she emailed me and she said, she said, it's so sad, but my daughter came to me one day and said, Mommy, she said, can we do a Reading Made Easy lesson? She said, we hadn't done school for like 2 weeks. She goes, can we do a Reading Made Easy lesson? She said, honey, why do you want to do a Reading Made Easy lesson? She says, because when we're done, you'll read me a story. And she said, I realized for 2 weeks I hadn't even read to my child because they were so busy with something going on in their family. And she said, and it was sad that she knew that if we did a Reading Made Easy lesson, that I would read to her because you put that at the end of every lesson. And she said, thank you for, reminding us how important that is. And reading aloud is wonderful, but what about reading instruction? Phonics, right? We do have to get down to phonics. But phonics is a tool. It is merely a tool for decoding words or combining sounds to form words. It's a tool for teaching reading. It shouldn't become so complicated that it hinders the child from learning to read. Now, there are some programs out there that spend so much time on all the phonetics, the diphthongs, digraphs, all the things we can't even pronounce. And the child learns all these individual letter sounds and all, but it's months before they even learn to put these sounds together to make words, and then long time before sentences are made, and way long before stories. So in my program, we start reading stories right away because kids, you know what they want? They just want to read. They don't want to just spend all this time. They do not want to become linguists, all right? They want to learn to read. And when my oldest daughter, Michelle, who's 31 now, was learning to read, she had a hard time applying the phonics rules she was learning. They were too abstract for her. And the materials that we were using focused so heavily on rules that reading was delayed. And it was just a conglomeration of rules that was irrelevant to her. And she had no desire to learn to read, especially not if it meant trudging through phonics lessons without a payoff in sight. What's the payoff? That kids really read, right? And I was using a challenging kindergarten program with Michelle, 4 years old. It was insane. And after a few months, we were both burned out. Now, here I was. My oldest child was 4. I had a 2-year-old, and then I was pregnant with my 3rd child. And we were already burned out on homeschooling within a few months, okay? Big mistake. But I decided to let Michelle skip her phonics worksheets one day, and I let her just do what she really wanted to do. She's very artistic. And so I said, you know what, you just go on in the dining room, you just do what you want to do. Now, I was really worried about this child's academic future. But what she wanted to do was to create dollhouse furniture. Now, my husband had showed her how to take a piece of poster board, and he cut something out like this, folded it, and it was a television set for her dollhouse. Well, she started making furniture, a china hutch with dishes. You see how you cut that out and you just fold it? Does that make sense? Okay, she was doing this on her own without a ruler, making an entire dollhouse of furniture. And I was worried about this child's academic future. And she was doing all this on her own. She was 4.5 years old. And here's some of the other ones. Now, these are based on her original drawings, and I actually used a ruler and straightened them up a little bit. But this is what she was doing. And in my book, Making Most of the Preschool Years, I have a whole dollhouse full of furniture, a whole pages that you can copy onto cardstock and make the dollhouse furniture. Now, Michelle was happy because she was doing what she wanted to do. Okay, but what about me? I had learned all these phonics rules and I needed to share it with somebody. Well, I had a willing subject. My daughter Melissa, who was 2.5 at the time, just wanted to be read to all day long. And I was pregnant, so I was happy to sit and read to her. So I'd sit in the rocking chair and just read to her while Michelle is working at the dining room table making her dollhouse furniture. And as I would read to Melissa, I would point out the phonics rules in the words we were reading. You know, that's a P and it says P. And oh, that says ooh. Can you say ooh? And she'd go ooh. And I would just tell her all the sounds, and I began to quiz Melissa. And soon I would say, like to Melissa, see, there's O-W. Now what does O-W say? And from the next room, Michelle would, the one who was the artsy one. Now it's confusing because all my girls are M's and all my boys are R's, so just, I'm confused. But anyway, Michelle was the older one who was the artsy one. Melissa was the younger one who wanted to sit on my lap and be read to. So I would say to Melissa, now what does O-W say? And from the next room, Michelle goes, it's owl like in cow or O like in snow. So Melissa, the little one, was learning to read in a relaxed, pleasurable way on my lap, and Michelle was learning to read by eavesdropping. So if you have a child who's having trouble with something, go in the next room and whisper it, and they'll get it, okay? Or just start to teach it to another child. You know, a younger one. Well, if you don't want to learn, I guess maybe Bobby wants to learn. No, I want to do it. You know, they're so competitive. It's funny. But I learned some important lessons from this experience. I learned that Michelle, the artsy one, learns better when her hands are busy. Okay? She always did better if she was drawing or making something. Now, if I was doing that, I would be tuning everything else around me out. Okay? I have to focus on whatever's going on because I'm more visual. But she was very auditory. And so she could be drawing and doing all kinds of things and listening, okay? But my daughter Melissa was very visual. So she would have to sit, the little one, she had to sit beside me and see what I was doing. She learned best by my side. And that happened years later as I would read aloud to the kids. The older one, Michelle, would draw a picture of something based on what we were reading. And the younger one, Melissa, would sit beside me. And eventually, as I would read aloud, I'd have to get 2 library books of the same story because Melissa was constantly reading over my shoulder, and that just kind of bothered me. But so I'd give her her own book, but I would make her read aloud too, because if I didn't, she'd be on page 200 when we were on page 20. And just to let you know a little bit of what happens, you can see kind of where your kids are going to go when they're little. Michelle, who was the artsy one, now is 31. She has her own cafe bakery. She's a cake artist. And in 2003, she won an international award. She decorated cakes for 3 days in Las Vegas and came out with first place at the International Dairy Deli Bakery Association award. And now she does all kinds of amazing cakes. I can give you her website. You can look. We're in Florida, but you can still look. But anyway, and then Melissa, who was the one that learned to read, she actually learned to read at 3. She has her bachelor's degree in English and American literature that she got from the University of Tampa, and then she got her master's in English and American literature from the University of Kent in Canterbury, England. She graduated in Canterbury Cathedral, which was awesome. And now she's been living in South Korea for the past 3 years teaching English. She's home for 2 weeks right now as we're here, and then she'll be going back for another 2 or 3 years. But it's just interesting to look back when your kids are little. And I can see, too, my boys, Robert and Raymond, who are now in the military, were always in little army outfits, you know. They were always in camouflage playing army and everything. It's just funny to look back and see that these things were taking place when they were young. Now, letter decoding or phonics is an effective tool, but you know what? Story context also helps when kids are trying to figure out what words mean. Letter decoding is the most important, right? Sounding out a word. But story context helps, okay? How often can you understand a word that you may not know because of the words surrounding it, right, in context? Also, pictures allow confirmation of phonetic choices as well as an aesthetic dimension. A lot of people are like, no, I'm going to cover the pictures because I don't want my child to look at the pictures and possibly find out. Well, why not? Let them use everything they can. It's like a puzzle, all right? We can let them use some of these devices earlier on. That's critical thinking. If your child's looking at a picture to sort of help them figure out what's going on in the story, that's using some critical thinking skills to figure that out. Now, if they're just guessing, you might have to cover the picture. But meaning and context, we read that we might derive meaning from the text, right? We want meaning. And children often use context in order to decipher words. You can come on in if you want. Okay. Now, I'll give you an example. Bill jumped on his bicycle and rode up the hill. The word bicycle is supposed to be more like in gray there. Now, let's assume, I'm sorry about this funky wall thing, but let's assume that the child can't read the word bicycle, okay? But they could figure it out. He jumped on his bicycle and rode up the hill. The child could figure out that that was bicycle, right? Because the first letter is a B, all right? It's not bike because what? It's too long for bike, right? So they're going to automatically know, jumped on his and rode up the hill. They're going to use context to figure it out, right? Now, of course, if there was a picture, that would make it even easier to figure out. Now, if the text is dull and devoid of meaning, like Jan had a pan, Jan had a tan pan, Jan had a tan pan in the sand, a lot of these little beginning readers are like this. You know, the kids are like, what in the world? You know, there is no context here to help the child decipher meaning or to decipher the words. And it's also a tongue twister. There's some of these little readers out there that they predominantly focus on one letter of the alphabet. Do you know how hard it is for a child with no two front teeth to read the stories that all start with the letter S? You know, Sally, you know, it's very hard. And many beginning reading programs spend months focusing on short vowels, okay, and senseless stories. And children grow tired of this regimen. They want to get on with real reading. Come on. What's going on here? Okay. And many years ago, before I wrote Reading Made Easy, I was teaching my son Robert to read. He's the one who's like 27 now and in the Marine Corps officer program. He's been in the Marines for 7 years and just started the officer program. He's an Arabic linguist. But he learned some simple words. He was about 5, so I handed him a little reader, and he promptly took it out and began to read. And he read, "Hop, Fred, hop, hop, hop." And he rolled his eyes and he looked at me and he goes, "Mom, people don't really talk like that. This isn't a real story." And I was amazed at this 5-year-old's perceptiveness, that he knew that wasn't a real story. And he knew it was words merely pretending to be a story. He had already developed a good ear for literature. Why? Because I read aloud to them every day, lots and lots of picture books every day. And I asked Robert, I said, "Well, Robert, would you like to write a story?" I don't know, it just popped into my head at that moment. Because he's like, "This isn't a real story." I said, "Well, would you like to write a real story?" He's like, "Sure." And he knew what a real story sounded like. So he dictated to me this wonderful story about something about a knight riding toward a dazzling castle in the sky. I'm like, whoa, this is much better than Hop, Fred, hop, 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 you know? So I wrote it out on the big kindergarten paper, you know, with the big lines and the place for the picture at the top. It took me like 6 pages because, you know, you're writing like this big. And so then I took it and I had him draw little pictures to go with it, and I handed it to him. I said, "Here's your reader. Read it." And he goes, "I can't read this. This is too hard." And I said, "Well, who made up the story?" He goes, "Well, I did." I said, "Well, if you made the story, then you're supposed to be able to read it." And I realized that was a little fib, kind of, but he goes, "Oh, okay." So he took it and he started reading it. Well, he had some phonetic knowledge, so he was able to read his story. And when he would get to the word like night, K-N-I-G-H-T, I had to explain to him about the K being silent and the G and the H being silent. He's like, "Whoa, that's weird." And, you know, so I explained to him what he needed to know in order to read the story. And he read it beautifully. Then when he read it the second time, of course, it was even better, even easier for him. And each day, Robert would dictate a story to me and draw a picture to go with it. And these became his personal readers. So within 3 months, and this is also something I have integrated into Reading Made Easy, the kids will, by the end of the program, have created their own readers. And within 3 months, Robert went from reading on a kindergarten level to reading on a 3rd grade level. I did get some of those 3rd grade readers out and have him read them, and he noted that those were much more interesting than the kindergarten ones. So, but every day it was kind of funny because this teaching method produced a great reader in Robert, and it produced 2 great storytellers. Because every day Robert would dictate a story to me, and his little brother Raymond, who was 3 at the time, had to dictate a story to Mommy too, but it had to be longer than his brother's story. He had to make sure it had more pages, so he would keep going with his story. Because they're very competitive, even now, one in the Marine Corps, the other one in the Navy, okay? So, but I found that kindergarten paper, Robert's like, this doesn't look like a book though, Mommy. It was too big and clumsy, okay? So we discovered we could make some little books. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to make a little book. Hang on. It's called a bound book, and you don't need any paper clips or staples or yarn or anything. And it's from Dinah Zeich's Big Book of Books and Activities. If you don't have any of the stuff, you can come up and get the handouts up here. Just come on up and just take one paper from each stack of the handouts and the little colored papers, and I'll just show you how to use it. Notice how one of these has like a slit in the center, okay? Then you should have at least 2. You may have picked up more because these are kind of stick together. 2 that don't have that center part cut out, okay? Take the 2 pages that are like this. They're actually slit on just the ends. Take those 2, and you're going to do, Dinah Zeich uses a lot of names for her folds. You're going to do what's called a hot dog fold. Make it like a hot dog bun. Don't crease it because it's like a hot dog bun. Then you take the other book, and through the center, you slide the hot dog bun through the center, get it to the middle. If there was a child here, we could get him to help us with it. But anyway, and you kind of wiggle it. Everybody get that to work? And then it's a little book. And the reason I use a bunch of different colors paper because it just makes it easier for you to see how it goes together. And so these are little books that your kids, they can dictate a story to you if they're not capable of writing it, because their spoken vocabulary, of course, is greater than their reading or writing vocabulary. So if they dictate the story to you, you write a few sentences per page and they can illustrate it. You can put as many of those little pages in as you want, okay? So you can put a lot in. So this is just a fun way to make a little book. And if you're not sure how we did it, you can come up at the end and get another set of these that are not folded, so that's easier for you to see. All I did was I took one sheet of paper, okay, we folded in half and cut it, and then that's how I make those others. We fold them again, then I cut a little divot out for that center part, and then for the other piece, it's just cutting in 1 inch on either end. But you can take some of those with you afterwards, and you'll see how that works. But anyway, so this worked out really well, making little readers. So by the end of Reading Made Easy, your child has made his or her own readers. And that's the bound book we just talked about from Dinah Zeich's Big Book of Books and Activities. She has all kinds of really cool pop-up books and different folds and things to make. But children want to begin reading right away. They don't want to wade through endless lessons filled with rules. Yes? Oh, the Dinah Zeich thing? Hang on. Dinah Zeich's Big Book of Books and Activities. She has another one called Big Book of Projects and something. That one I don't really like as well. It's more geared towards like teachers and bulletin boards and, you know, something more massive. But this one, Dinah Zeich's Big Book of Books and Activities, is awesome. She has trifold books, books that look like whales and, you know, all kinds of things. So it's a lot of fun. But children want to begin reading right away. They want to use illustrations that extend the stories. They want to use their own creativity to develop their own stories and illustrations. And Reading Made Easy addresses each of these 4 points. Reading right away, not wading through endless lessons filled with rules, using illustrations to help, and developing their own stories. And, yes?
Have you ever had one kid that did not want to illustrate?
Yes. Have I ever had a child that didn't want to illustrate? Yeah, we use stickers, stencils, cut out pictures out of magazines, download clip art off the internet. Just let them just let them be creative with other media. But Reading Made Easy uses print clues that allow students to begin reading right away. And this one handout here that you have that shows the cover, that'll show you kind of what I'm talking about. Short vowel sounds, like as and cat and ahs and cup, are gray because they make a soft, subtle sound. I don't even use the term short and long vowels in my book because kids think of short vowels and long vowels. Okay, they're very literal. But for us to discuss this, the short vowels are in gray. That way when they see a word cat, they know that's cat and not Kate right away because it's gray. Then the long vowels appear in bold black because it's a stronger, harder sound, like in A as in cake. The silent letters are dotted because they're important, they're there, but they don't make a sound, like in cake here. And letter combinations are circled because often a child will know that OR says or AR says R, but they lose sight of it in the midst of a word, and they just read straight through, sounding each letter out individually. But by circling certain letter combinations, it pulls it out, and the child knows, okay, I know that's a unit. That makes one sound, that AR or OR. Here's some other examples of letter combinations, like SH as in ship. Okay? Often a child may know that SH is sh, but at the end of a word, like in the word dash, they don't really see it as readily as they do at the beginning of a word, so they start sounding out the S and the H individually. But by circling it, they see it the same way with CH. And sight words are underlined, and we play a lot of games. We make something called a sight word worm, and we play a lot of bingo games and so forth to learn the sight words. And like the, was, said, and they. These are words you just can't sound out exactly. It's was, not was, which is what was would be if it were phonetic. So we make something like this called a sight word worm that you can make on half sheets of poster board or on large colored construction paper. And the child just glues these circles. I have the circles in the back if you need to copy them. But the child just, you write the word on the circles, the child glues them on the worm as they go, and then draws the little feet on them and so forth. And you can hang them up on a door or by the child's bed and use that to review the sight words. Now, looking at that handout that you have, you see that this is a sentence from that lesson 22. The rat can rake the hay. The sight words are underlined, the short vowels are gray, the long vowels are bold, the silent letters are dotted, and so that's using those phonetic clues, what I call phonetic clues, and there's the handout you have. If you look at the back of the handout, you'll see these are index cards that you will actually use. You just go to Office Depot and get like 500 of them or something, and because they have them in big packs like that. And you will actually write one or more sentences from the story on index cards using the print clues, using a black and a gray crayon or marker. And as you write it, you don't have to do this at midnight ahead of time. You do it as the child's sitting there and you discuss, now why did I underline that word? And they're like, oh, because that's a sight word, that's the. Why did I make that letter gray? Because that's ah. And why did I make that letter dotted? Because it's silent. You know, you talk about it while you're doing it. Then they've already read this sentence in the little story in the lesson. On the other side, you'll see the picture and the story. They've read it in the story. Now they're going to read it on index cards. You lay them out in a row, and you have the child read it. Then, after they've read it, you mix the cards up, and you say, now it's your turn to put the sentence in order. They know at this time a sentence begins with an uppercase letter, and ends in a period. So they put the on the left and hey on the right. It also helps with the reading from left to right transition. And then it's like a puzzle to decide where the other words go. So this gives more of a hands-on approach to reading as they can manipulate the cards. And here's another lesson that appears later. You'll see where we have this. This is what I call the lesson work, where they're just going through and reading, either reviewing or learning new sounds. And then on the next page, we have the story. Now the stories are going to be longer because this is much further in. Then we have a picture that goes with the story. Then we have discussion questions. I mentioned this is all scripted. This unusual font is what you say to the child. You ask the child questions because the picture is going to offer more details about the story because the stories are short. Then we're going to do 2 sentences now on index cards, still only working with 1 at a time. These are sentences pulled from the story that they can do on index cards, and you mix them up, and they have to get the sentence in correct order. And that also helps with sentence structure. You're not really discussing nouns and verbs and adjectives and adverbs and so forth, but they are learning about them in a real and practical way and the proper structure in the sentence. And then also now, we also have a section here where the same sentences that were on in the story and were on index cards are now printed without print clues. The child can copy those, or if they can't write, we say skip that, but have them read it because the print clues have been omitted. So that helps to wean them from the print clues. I also tell parents as you progress and you're doing the index card activities, if you can leave some of the print clues off the index cards, do so, because that will help wean them from the print clues. You may only include the newer clues and leave the older ones off. And then we have another picture that the child can trace or draw that relates to the story. And now we ask the child to make up a sentence about the picture they drew. Later we're going to ask them to make up a story about the picture. Remember I mentioned we integrate into the program having the children write their own readers. But we gradually get them into that. We first start just by asking for a sentence and then later a story. And later, I just meant, this is all what I just talked about. But you know, I was thrilled to see how each of my children's reading abilities skyrocketed as they made their own readers. Their stories became their own readers. And it was exciting to see how their vocabulary developed, that they were actually using the words that they heard me use when I was reading aloud to them. They were actually putting those words into practice and making them part of their own spoken vocabulary. And it helps the kids with developing their composition skills later on. If they are orally either narrating a story that you've read aloud or dictating their own stories to you now, then later when they are asked to do a written composition, it won't be so difficult because they've been doing it orally all along. What happens is when we ask kids finally in 4th grade to write something, they're like, or 2nd grade, you know, they don't know what to write. Well, if they had been doing this orally all along, dictating to you, they know what to write at the end when they're asked to do a composition. Now, the last 12 lessons of Reading Made Easy is a 12-chapter story called Gideon's Gift. Some of the stories earlier on in Reading Made Easy are very short. Some of them span 3 lessons, like a little chapter book, okay? Like one of the stories is, will Baby Bird learn to fly? Well, it takes you through 3 lessons to discover if Baby Bird will learn to fly. And I have parents email me all the time. We had to do all 3 of those lessons in one day because my child had to find out, will Baby Bird learn to fly, you know? But so several of them are continuing stories, but the very last 12 lessons is a 12-chapter book, like an I Can Read chapter book called Gideon's Gift. And it's a story about a young boy finding his God-given gift. And he's also learning to read. But the parent reads the meatier chapter to the child. I have that included in the guide. Then the child reads an adaptation of that chapter. So they are now making that story their own. They're getting the more details from the chapter the parent reads. But then it's becoming their own as they are reading the adaptation, which is much shorter. And this helps the students transition from simple books and stories to chapter books. And I also have 4 activity books to accompany Reading Made Easy. The guide can be used solely on its own. All the stories and directions are in here. But I have parents for years saying, oh, we want some workbooks, you know, something to use. So I developed some activity books, workbooks. There are 4 of them because each one covers 27 lessons. The book is 108 lessons, so each workbook covers 1/4 of the book. And they're just, they're more poems and stories and activities to reinforce the lessons to be used for review. And here's just some sample pages from some of the activity books. I also talked about how we have copy work, where the child copies that sentence that you've written on index cards. The child copies it, and we include that in the manual without the print clues. Well, we have it in the copy work as well, where they gives them a space to copy it. And I mentioned that even if your child can't copy, they can trace. You can get a highlighter marker and have them trace over it, because markers glide, and highlighter markers aren't as messy as regular markers. Plus, you can see through it, so they can still see the letters underneath. So that's another way to help a child transition into writing, is by tracing with a marker. And here's just some more pages. We have some crossword puzzles and things like that from the workbooks. Here's just a few more pages. We also have space for the child to write their sentence or story in the workbooks. So their readers would be contained in the workbooks at the end. More pages. I have a lot of rebus stories. I don't know how well you can see that, but you know where the little picture is included up there? Then they have to find the word at the top and write it in, and so forth. Come on. These deals that I have on the package, this page that I handed out to you, these are not correct because we're offering super discounts at the conference. But I do want to mention first, besides Reading Made Easy being available in the paperback form, we have it in CD form. This is all in PDF files that you can print. Some people just use it right off of a laptop. They never print them, believe it or not. I have people who travel who do that. Then the workbooks that are available in paperback are also, all 4 are available on a CD and PDF files, all 4 workbooks. And if you look at the pricing sheet, this pricing sheet, I'll tell you that package deal at the top that's $89.95 is $72 at the conference. And then the next package deal, see that top package deal is, let's see if I show that on here. That top package deal here is $72 at the conference, and that's all paperback, the paperback guide and the paperback workbooks. Our most popular package is the next, let's see if it's on here, is the next one on that sheet I gave you. Well, that's the wrong booth too. Anyway, the next package where it's the paperback book and the CD for the activity books, that's our most popular because obviously if you have more children, you can print your activity books. That's $64.95 regularly. We have that for $54 at the conference. And then the next one, which is both of them on CD, $40 normally, and we have that for $36 at the conference. And then if you just want the activity books, because some people already have the manual, that's normally $45, and we have that for $36 at the conference. So anyway, and this one is normally, just buying this by itself is normally $49. If that's all you want, we have that for $36 at the conference. Sorry I didn't print up all those, you know, pages. But anyway, we're in booth 414. 414. So does anybody have any questions? No? Yes?
Do you have any suggestions for tactics for children based on the different types of learners that they might be, or the different, I'm just thinking my daughter always likes whatever it is that I start to teach her with.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we get a little bit in, she doesn't like it. The easy readers like the Bob books,
Right.
the
Mm-hmm.
animals that we had, but also Ordinary Parents Guide to Teaching.
She gets bored after a while.
Yeah, I mean, but
Mm-hmm.
she's still just barely decoding and not really able to make the transition to the real book.
To the fluent sea level. Well, that's one reason I have the index cards. A lot of kids really like manipulating those and playing with those. I have one daughter who that's how she totally learned to read, because she had a vision problem, and that's why I did that. She had to have prisms in her glasses, so she had trouble looking at anything on a page. But by putting them all on index card, everything she learned to read, I put on index cards. And that's why I integrated that into this program. But that's one thing. Having them dictate stories to you is another way to do it. One thing you can do, too, is you can take the words that are the word lists in the lesson and help your child make up a story using the words from the word list. That's a lot of critical thinking involved in that. You know, you might choose 5 words and say, let's see if we can make a story using these 5 words. You know, of course, they're going to use other words that they might not know, but you can help them with that. And just having them illustrate, and I think letting them just have more ownership of it by making their own readers, I think is a really good motivational tool for kids. Yeah, do you know what her learning style is?
I'm still struggling with that. I think she's mostly auditory.
Mm-hmm.
I see other things in her as well. So.
Right. Another thing that's really good for kids, I'll mention, are the Leapfrog DVDs. If anybody has those, have y'all heard of those? The Leapfrog Phonics DVDs are excellent, and they have math ones also. I think there's 5 of them.
My son taught himself to read when he was 3 using those.
Yes.
My daughter is 6 and she's barely decoding, and I'm starting to.
Now, does she use those at all? Does she?
She's watched them many times, but she doesn't seem to grasp onto those.
See, I had a child who's an auditory learner, but she learned all the rules but could not apply them. So, don't panic. It'll click one day. How old is she? Just keep reading aloud to her. Does she like that? Well, I would do that and just do some, you know, I know it's getting late, so you probably have to go. But anyway, we're at booth 414, and if you want to come up and get some of those other little booklets to see how it is to make those little colored books, then feel free. And anybody can come up and talk to me if you want while I'm packing up. Thank you so much.